They say that history repeats itself, but what they do not tell us is that it does so in reverse. The rhythms of creation resonate in palindromic patterns, as does the harmonic series. That is to say, it is identical both forward and back, like the word racecar. Imagine, once upon a time, during the early dark ages of the 7th century, as midnight divided the common years 681 and 682, 4444 Anno Mundi, a rare celestial event known as a mutual planetary occultation occurred, whereby Jupiter was fully eclipsed by Venus, resulting in a perfect syzygy with Earth. During this time, astronomers and scientists taught us that the sun circled around the Earth, and from their perspective on Earth, they were correct. Exactly 950 years later, Galileo published dialogue concerning the two chief world systems, demonstrating his revolutionary theory that the Earth circles around the sun. And from the sun's perspective, he too was correct. But interestingly, one could again look 950 years before that midwinter night between 681 and 682 to discover that Aristarchus of Samos was already in the midst of conceptualizing the Earth's revolution around the sun. 950 years before, then 950 years after. The same independently made observations. A century prior to Aristarchus, Philolaus theorized of a central fire around which planets and suns circled. And once again, a century after Galileo, Thomas Wright published an original theory or new hypothesis of the universe, describing our galaxy, around the bright center of which planets and stars revolve. 1,068 years after, then 1,068 years before. And of course, that eternal first and final symphony, Musica Universalis, as heard and described by Pythagoras, triumphantly echoes from the sublime pages of Einstein's general relativity. And at the very center of the years between was a midnight occultation of Jupiter and Venus at the division of 682 and 681, 4444 Anno Mundi. And so, a pattern emerges from within the fabric of time and consciousness, whereas there exists a nexus, like a sedentary node on a vibrating string, upon which fate and free will reflect and oscillate outward in flawless symmetry, a call and response. The Buddha's spiritual awakening under the sacred fig tree at Bodh Gaya, and the emergence of Buddhism in India that followed, is answered by Anagarika Dharmapala's own pilgrimage to Bodh Gaya, his establishment of the Mahabodhi Society, and the resulting re-emergence of Buddhism in India after millennia of decline. The magnificent and glorious rebirth of the Renaissance in Italy from the deep slumber of the Dark Ages paralleled the birth of Jesus, and the monumental church of the Holy Sepulchre, under which Christ himself was interred, was built and rebuilt like clockwork, set forward and back against the union of 681 and 682. And the Babylonian exile of Jews from Judea, 1,260 years before that keystone moment in the 7th century, in the 6 years after the destruction of Solomon's temple, is mirrored by the tragedy of Wanzi and the final solution 1,260 years after 682, and 6 years before the establishment of the modern state of Israel. 2 pillars flanking a long and storied diaspora. And straddling the apex, in the very center of our spiritual evolution that guides our approach toward the fundamental, Islam emerges to provide the final brick, whereby its prophet is our last, and yet its message is spoken from the beginning. So what discoveries await us now, in the final days of 2017, as we near the end of 1,335 years from that eternal midnight occultation between 681 and 682? The structures of time and creation are measured in accordance to the harmonic series of sound. The sine wave is the foundation of sound, upon which the great architect constructs the universe. It is the humble seed to the tree of life. The further we begin to expand our perspective, the more clearly we can observe the actual sine wave motion of celestial bodies through space. There are no ellipses, and there are no circles. Consider a car racing along an elliptical track on a dark, clear night. A child buckled into the back seat traces circles with a flashlight around an invisible point against the side window, gleefully demonstrating yesterday's lesson on the orbits of our solar system. However, from the quiet distance beyond the track's periphery, one can see the true sine wave path of the flashlight revealed, as the child's flashlight within the car independently moves at but a fraction of the speed of the car itself, so that its path, as seen from a distance, can never circle back, cross, or close upon itself. So too would we observe the motion of the car's headlights from beyond our atmosphere, as the Earth's rotating surface, upon which the car races, would carry it ever eastward, even as the driver turns west. The relationship between flashlight, car, and rotating Earth is as that of planetary orbit, revolving galaxy, and galactic forward velocity. All individual elements, big and small, ultimately move in sine waves. Now with sound, every solitary sine wave is enriched by an infinite series of diminishing secondary waves called harmonics, giving sound its color and its depth. It is within this harmonic series that we find the universal blueprint of existence. Continuing again to expand upon our perspective of the cosmos, we will see that the cumulative movements of individual planetary and stellar waves within a system combine and interact in the very same manner as the harmonic series. As an example, if we graph the collective paths of 8 planets in our solar system, an image similar to that of a vibrating string emerges. Each consecutive wave, beginning with Neptune, is shorter in amplitude, wavelength, and period, and higher in frequency, consistent with the patterns of sound. In fact, if one were to isolate the following partials in any harmonic series, the exact orbital rhythms and ratios of our solar system would be revealed. Again, if one were to isolate the following partials in any harmonic series, the accelerated orbits of our solar system would be revealed. This literally means that within our own voices, the music of the spheres is sung, and the patterns of the heavens can be heard. So, as every harmonic series of sound has a fundamental vibration from which it begins, so too must our solar system. 125 octaves and a major second below the orbital frequency of Earth, we will find that fundamental, with a pitch of B, by which our 8 planets collectively resonate, carrying forth within their vibrations a speck of light we call the sun. B would also be recognized as the first letter of the Bismillah, which begins the Quran and every prayer in Islam. The resonating frequency of Sahasrara, the crown chakra, from which all other chakras emanate, and the very first letter of the great book of Genesis in the Holy Scriptures. Whether one's song is sung by science or faith, from east or west, we all tune to the same eternal fundamental. Picture for a moment the voice of a singular order, sublime in its simplicity, yet infinite in its expanse. We toil to the rhythms of its upper partials by the daily grind of our towns and our cities, the monthly tides upon our harbors and shorelines, and the annual harvest from our fields. Our bodies faithfully sing the image of every resonating pattern from day one. At the instant of conception, a fundamental cell divides into 2, which soon become 4, then 8, and so it continues, just as the frequencies within each consecutive octave in the harmonic series double and double and double again. The sequence of our DNA, like sound, is palindromic, and its contours trace those of our palindromic solar system. The splendid geometry of our own form, each a unique and complex symphony of atoms and molecules converging like Chladni figures, is built to the golden ratios from within the harmonic series. And the cycles that govern the reproduction of these patterns through every generation are themselves conducted to the periods of our cosmic waveforms. The very arc of history rises from the ebb and flow of lower and longer waves, as time and consciousness bend to the structures of the harmonic series of sound. quilting together a patchwork not of events, but vibrations. The great spirits of faith and reason lift us ever higher toward the branches of the tree of life, but always our folly betrays us, as we see only the flesh of its fruit, and taste only the flavor of its season, discarding the timeless seed within. But still, our collective unconscious of all that has been, and all that will be, is communicated from within the patterns that we hear and that we speak. We have passed down the mantras of the universal fundamental. We have encoded its frequencies into our architecture and our art. We compose our music and poetry to the meter of its structures, and we continue still to recite its most primary rhythms from the pages of our ancient texts. The eternal story of creation from Torah fittingly begins with sound, from which there is light, then time, the three fundamental elements of the heavenly ether, to which the first, second, and fourth days resonate, like octaves of the tonal root. The third day, a perfect fifth, brings forth life from earth, as does the sixth day, again an octave higher. Day 5 brings forth life from water, the major third, and upon the seventh is the promise of the Creator. All 7 days, like the first 7 partials of the harmonic series, resonate concurrently and presently, all 7 happening now, whereby each day is directly sustained as a consequence of the longer fundamental or fundamentals below, and in turn sustain its own series above. The Quran describes the creation of earth in 2 distinct periods, the culmination of 6, whereby its sustenance is proportionally measured by 4. Again, one can see the ratios of the harmonic series revealed, in that every frequency is of itself the fundamental of a secondary series within. Consequently, the 6th partial is sustained in due proportion by the fundamental, the 2nd and 3rd partials, and itself as its own fundamental. 4 periods of sustenance within the patterns of sound. There are no contradictions. 7 ascending heavens fashioned with harmony, one above another, again like 7 partials of the voice of creation, resonating concurrently, presently, and palindromically, in 2 periods perfectly reflecting one another. They say that history repeats itself, but what they do not tell us is that it does so in reverse. Perhaps the single greatest enigma of the harmonic series can be found in its ability to deceive. The illusion of a melodic line leads the ear downward from the infinite, momentarily touching upon every single harmonic on its approach toward the center, where it pauses at the 2nd partial before accelerating upwards once again. And we never hear the fundamental. So too, throughout time, even our most celebrated visionaries were confined in their focus to this phenomenon, whereas the unbounded universal harmony of creation could only be perceived as chaos and dissonance. Still, a clearly defined descending path reflecting every harmonic can be traced by pagan deities and philosophies of antiquity, just as every scientific rediscovery of modern times might have been predicted by its return. But we can be mindful of that ever-elusive fundamental, that we might know it far below our focus toward the infinite, as it rings out once more upon the completion of a cycle on the 31st of December of the year 5125, 8888 Anno Mundi. And its very course might be recognized too, as we return to the stories of our old prophets, read in reverse, to the opening words of chapter 2. So, to speak kindly, and to work toward achieving harmony within one's own self, the structures and spaces within which we live, and ultimately with each other, would be to harmonize with no less than the very voice of creation itself. And as the harmonic cadence of our universe changes as it does, and the cosmic frequencies adjust from their root in the sixth partial to that of the seventh, we may find ourselves with a pocket full of seeds with which we may return. And that is just the beginning.